Servus, Männer, it's Red Pill Germany again. If you follow my channel, at least for a bit, you know that in Germany, the question of who is going to follow Angela Merkel, who's going to be the next chancellor, or more precise, the next chancellor candidate for the CDU-CSU union, the union of German cucks, of German centrists, that is the big question in Germany, politically speaking, at least at the moment. Of course, this question probably does not really determine the future of Germany. I think both candidates, there are only two left, are equally bad, probably. I do not like nor promote any of these two guys. It is Armin Laschet from North Rhine-Westphalia, or should I say from Belgium, and it is Markus Söder from Bavaria, or should I say Franconia. As I record this video, there is a meeting or several big meetings where they want to decide who's gonna be the chancellor candidate, who will lead the union parties in the upcoming campaign for the election in autumn. In today's video, I want to briefly summarize again who these two guys generally are. I talked about them before. Check out my old videos. I don't want to repeat everything, but at least I want to introduce them briefly, and then I want to tell you what all the fuss is about and why there is not a clear decision yet. There is historical precedent. We had that in the 70s already. Franz Josef Strauß from Bavaria wanted to be chancellor candidate, and there was a CDU guy, I think Albrecht was his name, and that was already a big fight between the two sister parties back then, so now it happens once again. So I want to introduce that and talk a little bit about that, but most importantly, towards the end of the video, I want to tell you the, a little bit uncomfortable truth maybe for many people. It's not very easy for many people to talk about that. It is a little bit of red pill knowledge, if you want to call it that way, but there is a reason that nobody dares to talk about why Armin Laschet is not a good candidate in that sense, and why Söder is, objectively speaking, the better leader and the better candidate. And once again, I don't mean that I like him better. I don't mean that I think he will be the better choice for Germany. They're both horrible, but there is an elephant in the room, and I want to talk about that today. But before we get started, I want to thank all my supporters and my subscribers. Like, share, and subscribe if you like my material, if you like these videos. If you haven't done so already, now is the time to consider joining an alt tech platform. Links are down in the descriptions below. Alternatives to Silicon Valley and big tech will become way more important as we go along, and you should really consider making an account or joining somewhere there. And of course, if you want to help out with my channel in other ways, you can do so via PayPal, Patreon, or Subscribestar. Alright, so I am following this topic since 2018 already. That was when this great series of lost regional state elections for the CDU party started, and when Angela Merkel came under more and more pressure. She then stepped down from a party office, but now is the time, and I think they're really late with that, to build up a chancellor candidate. Who will be the next chancellor? And it will be probably the chancellor, because odds are that still the CDU will become the strongest party in the German Bundestag. A lot of things can happen, of course, until autumn, but it looks like it is pretty probable that the CDU will still have the chancellor position. So a lot of names were dropped, and a lot of people were said to be in a position where they could end up at the head of the CDU or as the common chancellor candidate of the CDU-CSU union. But now it is really down to two names: Armin Laschet from North Rhine-Westphalia and Markus Söder from Bavaria. And as I said already, Laschet is actually historically, or his ancestry is from a German-speaking region of Wallonia in Belgium. You know that Belgium is this failed state, this micro-EU that consists of a southern French-speaking and a northern Dutch-speaking part. Of course, you can guess who dominates the country politically and who pays all the bills in this shared home arrangement. And while Armin Laschet, his ancestry is at least from a German-speaking minority there, he hasn't gotten this mindset of feeling entitled to other people's money genetically from the French side, but maybe culturally his family sucked this in somewhere there. So it is really fitting that he ended up in North Rhine-Westphalia. And he's also a Catholic. Markus Söder, on the other hand, is a Protestant. And yes, he's from the state of Bavaria, but he's not from the tribe of the Bavarians. So another parallel here. He is from the tribe of the Franks, he's from Franconia, from Nuremberg, and he's a Protestant. And I talked a lot about him. You can check out the video about Söder that I made if you're interested in that guy. So what is the predicament? What is the argument all about? Why can't they just agree on a candidate? Well, it's very easy. The CDU is the larger party. The CSU exists only in Bavaria. So most of the chancellors out of the Union camp were from the CDU, the much larger party. There was only Strauß and Stoiber, and none of these two guys ever succeeded at becoming chancellor. So there has never been a chancellor from the CSU. And now Mr. Söder wants to be the third guy who tries it. I really hope I haven't forgotten someone, but I think he's the third guy from the CSU who wants to be chancellor. So the problem is more with Armin Laschet. His name sounds like Lasch, and Lasch in German means soft or weak. And actually he looks that way and he talks that way too. He's just a very weak candidate. He doesn't have any skills, he doesn't have any knowledge, he's a networker. That means he talks to a lot of people and he wants to trade in favors and name dropping and networking. That's what he does. Söder, on the other hand, has the reputation, or at least he's perceived as a problem solver, as a strong individual who attacks problems right on and who has personal authority. These two guys couldn't be any different. And that is why most people in Germany think that Mr. Söder is the better candidate. They think of him as a competent guy, they perceive him as a competent guy, whereas they see Laschet, rightfully so I should say, as a very weak guy, which he definitely is. And even in the CDU party, there are a lot of people, especially the younger people, who favor the CSU guy, Mr. Söder. And the only people that I have seen to come forth in favor of Armin Laschet, at least in a very energetic and clear way, were the people from North Rhine-Westphalia, from his home state. But the other CDU guys, they either don't say anything, that is my perception at least, or they are clearly for Mr. Söder. And why is that? Why are so many parliamentarians from our Bundestag in favor of Mr. Söder? Well, easy. They don't want to clear their desks. They want to continue being a member of our Bundestag. And that means that the CDU party, if they cannot really win their own district, if they are a list candidate, the CDU party must do well in the election. They must get a huge chunk of the votes in order for many of these parliamentarians to keep their seat in parliament. And that means they want the strongest guy for the job, because that would maximize the CDU's outcome. Very easy, right? So they are afraid that if Mr. Laschet, this weakling, becomes the candidate, then the CDU will get maybe just 30% instead of 35%. And then some of them might actually lose their mandate. And Mr. Laschet doesn't care about that, because he might still be chancellor with 30%. The CDU might still be the strongest party, or the CDU-CSU faction is the biggest faction or something like that. And then he would be chancellor. He would have a black-green government, just like Mr. Söder wants, by the way, and nothing would change for him, but a lot of these CDU parliamentarians would have to go home and get some other job. So this is why the faction in the Bundestag is backing up Mr. Söder. And if you look at the polls, most people really see Söder, more than not actually, see him as a competent guy, as someone who is a leader who can solve problems, or he's suited for being a leader for being the chancellor. For the other guys, it doesn't look so good actually. And just a little side note, even the Green Party choose the candidate for whatever reason, I don't know, because they had the choice between Miss Baerbock and Mr. Habeck, and so they have a double leadership or something, and they decided that the lady should be the chancellor candidate, even though when you look at the polls, Habeck is doing much better. So maybe because she's a woman, I'm not sure, but they must have had their reasons for choosing the candidate that is perceived by people as less suited for leadership and weaker. So once again, coming back to the CDU, I sum up now. While Mr. Söder has a better reputation among voters and among the party base and the parliamentarians, Mr. Laschet is the favored candidate by the CDU party establishment. Not by the voters, not by the bases, not by the parliamentarians, but by party establishment guys. Just because he is in the CDU, he networked with them and they will get jobs if he becomes chancellor, and it is some higher ups in the party who are backing him up here. Okay, so now I want to come to the more fuzzy and maybe more sensitive topic, and that is the topic of size. Size matters, as we all know, especially in leadership positions. So look at this picture. What do you see? You see Mr. Laschet is walking energetically, and Mr. Söder is like standing on the sidelines, holding on to his notepad like a student who is a little bit nervous. They choose this picture. By the way, this picture went all around the German media, and they choose this picture deliberately. That wasn't coincidence. But you know, maybe you see it already. It's taken from a little bit of a weird angle. So why is that? When you look at a normal picture where you see both of these candidates from the front, it looks a little bit like this. Now, do you notice a little difference? Mr. Söder is a giant compared to Laschet. So I cannot tell you the absolute numbers. Maybe he's 170. He's not a midget, I mean, but he is much smaller than Mr. Söder, and that is important. And this is why some media avoid to show pictures where you see them really standing side by side, because Laschet would always have to look up to Söder. And Söder is not just tall, he's bulky. So I don't know if he's strong or just chubby, but he's a tall, bulky guy. Just like Mr. Seehofer, actually. Seehofer is also pretty tall. He's the former governor of Bavaria, now Minister for the Interior. Same party, also from Bavaria. But Laschet, next to Söder, he is tiny. And I think I don't have to remind you of the fact that we have a little bit of a crisis in Germany. People feel a little bit insecure right now. So who would they look up to for leadership right now? Of course, Mr. Söder. He has just personal authority. You know, there are different kinds of authority. There is authority coming from office, just because you hold a certain position, but there is personal authority also. We all know these people. They enter a room and they have everybody's attention without even having to do anything, you know? They don't have to raise their hand or be aggressive. They just have everybody's attention, and everybody instinctively flocks to them and thinks, hey, this is a guy who can lead. This is a guy I can ask for help. This is a guy who solves problems. And I'm not a fanboy of Mr. Söder. If you watch my video about him, I don't like this guy. I think he's horrible. But this is a very important factor. Don't underestimate that. We are wired this way. And it doesn't matter what their IQ is, or how nice they are, or how wise they are, or if they know all the facts, or how diligent they are. In the end, I mean, you need a certain threshold IQ, of course, and you need to do your homework, sure. But in the end, it comes down to these things. And for leaders, charisma and being perceived as strong and competent is really important, because you would be a really crappy leader. Even though you make all the right calls and you have all the information and you're super intelligent and you really do the right thing, but if you always have to convince everybody against their instincts, their evolutionary biological instincts to follow you, then you are a very inefficient leader, and it's not even your fault. It's because you're born this way. And a tall, big guy, He can be a bad leader, but people will instinctively follow him. So a good leader is someone who is wise and knowledgeable and does all the right things, and he has personal authority, because then he is an efficient leader, because then people, by their own instinct, will follow this guy, and he doesn't have to convince them in a very energy-consuming, inefficient process each and every time to please do as he says. That is an inefficient leader, it's a bad leader, and it doesn't even have, and I repeat myself here, it doesn't have anything to do with whether or not the decisions are good or correct or just or he's doing the right thing. It has nothing to do with that. Just by being always questioned, by never being taken seriously, never having this natural authority, by that virtue already, or by this vice actually already, you will never be, or that guy will never be a good leader. Period. That is what nobody talks about at the moment in Germany. But when I see these photographs, come on, it is so clear what they're trying to do here. They want to make it look like they're the same size. It's ridiculous. Mr. Söder is way taller, and that is so important. And if you think this is like an ad hominem or superficial or shallow, well, then you just haven't understood human psychology, I guess. I'm not a psychologist, but even I understand that. That is extremely important, especially in a time like this. And I'm telling you, the only reason that Angela Merkel could become the Chancellor was because that was not a time of real crisis, and because the old leadership of the CDU was, busy with a little bit of a corruption scandal. And the other guy, Schäuble, well, he was also involved in that corruption scandal. At least his name was tainted. And he sits in a wheelchair. Yes. And I don't think I have to spell out what that means in terms of this psychological framework or effect that I just introduced, okay? I think Schäuble is a very intelligent guy, but he's sitting in a wheelchair. And sorry, that is just why most people, and I think Schäuble knows this best, and he wouldn't disagree, that this pretty much makes sure that he will never be Chancellor. And that was probably the only reason why Angela Merkel could become Chancellor. Otherwise, it would have been Mr. Schäuble, I'm very sure. So, I am really curious about how this story will end, who will be the Chancellor candidate, and maybe the Chancellor candidate of the Union parties will not be Chancellor. We might still end up with a Green Party Chancellor. It doesn't look like that at the moment, but it's not autumn yet. We don't know. It could be that we will have a Green Party Chancellor, and none of these guys will be the head of the German government after all. But it will be Annalena Baerbock. And maybe I talk a little bit about her another time. I know talking about people is maybe not the deepest thing, but I think especially in this story, Söder against Laschet, I think there is a lot to be learned. It is very interesting, and it is way deeper than just, oh, there are two people and, I like this guy and I don't like his position on that. It is so much deeper what is going on here, especially in this conformation where one is a really weak candidate of a stronger party, the other one is a strong candidate from a smaller party. That is what makes this so interesting, and how the organizations and all their groups and peers react to this and how they handle this. I think this is very interesting. All right, so that is what I wanted to talk about today. Let me know in the comments down below if that triggered you, or if there are similar occurrences, similar cases from your country or where you're from, and what you think about this situation. As I said, personally, I don't think either of them is well suited being the Chancellor of Germany. Maybe Laschet would even be better in the end, because when the state actually declared war on the people, then maybe an incompetent leader that nobody really wants to follow is actually better, because he would be a weaker opponent in a way, right? So, I don't know. I'm not saying Söder should be the candidate. I tried to argue, and I hope you didn't misunderstand that I think Söder has just personal authority and he's perceived as a strong leader. He would be, objectively speaking, the stronger candidate, but we will see how it plays out. All right, enjoy the rest of your day. Servus, Kameraden.